Hello, podcast listeners, and welcome to the Core Health Collective show. My name is Ben Bowen, and on this podcast, we will be exploring what it means to be an entrepreneur in the health and wellness industry. We will explore the many opportunities and challenges we go through to improve the human condition with the products and services we sell. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Core Health Collective show. I always say I'm excited to have our guests because our guests are always amazing entrepreneurs in the health and wellness space. But today we have kind of a special episode. So with me, I've got Caillou Law, who's not only a longtime entrepreneur in the health and wellness space, he kind of wears many hats. He's high school science teacher. He's health enthusiast for himself and his family and his friends. He owns a company that services the health and wellness industry. And so we're going to get to know about Caillou Law and everything that he's doing and kind of what makes him tick and, you know, the opportunities and challenges of being an entrepreneur in the space like we always do. But then we're going to segue into like a special little mini episode within the episode. And Caillou and I are going to talk about one of our favorite topics, which is the war against inflammation in the body and mind. And I am no expert, and I'm really happy to have Caillou on the show so he can share his perspectives, and I can probably get some questions answered for all of us. Anyways, with no further ado, Caillou, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Very good. Thanks for having me on. It's been a few months trying to tee this up, so super excited. I think the viewers would like to know how we met each other, and it gives kind of an insight into both of our minds. I met Ben when he wanted to build a pool, and he had heard that through the grapevine that I had built my own pool, and that was true. And he jumped in with both feet, being the crazy guy that he is, and resourceful and hardworking. And he has built a beautiful in-ground pool that his family is enjoying now. And that's how we met, is pool building. And then we got into this crazy, keto, carnivore, low carb, talking about all this other stuff. So you never know what life brings you when you meet new friends, and embark on different journeys and challenge yourself, because that was a challenge for me, was the pool building. And I got a great friend out of it, and thoroughly have enjoyed watching Ben, pick up where I left off and actually improve on a number of things that I was struggled with, because it was obviously my first in-ground pool that I built. And I think it's good to let the viewers know maybe a little bit about my background in terms of why am I building pools? Well, it's the mentality that Ben and I always talk about. Is like, I think we're both lifelong learners, and we're always happy to continue to further progress in areas that we don't know. And certainly, number one, I want to let the viewers know I don't know everything, and I'm certainly not, concretely certain on many things. But there are certain areas where I would think that through my education and just personal experience that I might have a little bit more insight. And each person is very individual, not just their physiology, but their culture, their family structure, their own biology, their epigenetics. And so I would caution people to take anything I say as the gospel. I think they should probably do their own little research and start experimenting. But there are a few things that I'll probably touch on if we talk about it that are pretty much settled in terms of physiology of the body and science and just common sense, right? In terms of when we talk about inflammation, about our diet and everything else, that I think, the statistics are just not in our favor for our society. And I'm hoping that this podcast can give people some hope in some direction. And I think that's where Ben and I really dove into this health space, is that he was having, some health challenges that was not the norm, shall we say, of solutions. It was a journey through the tried and true medical system. And being his friend, I said, I care about you. I don't think that this would be beneficial for you. And I'll let him talk about that. Because I had already gone through that space with my wife, and that's another story. and just shared with them what I knew. So, I think I want to set that first before we move into talking about all these deep and kind of other things. And maybe it might be beneficial just to give a little bit about my background, just quickly, just to set the stage. So, speaking about my background, that's me in a nutshell right there. Many hats, many different things. But, I grew up in southwestern Ontario in a town called Wallaceburg with 3 other siblings. So a 4-kid family I was an immigrant. I was born in Hong Kong, and my parents escaped communism from China. They lived through the Cultural Revolution. They saw the atrocities of what happens to human nature when you pull away, you take away that kind of drive and reward for, harder work equals, maybe more success in life. And they saw the evils and just the malevolence of dictatorship and what happened with people that wanted to speak out. And that's why maybe I have that kind of chip on my shoulder of being taught throughout my life to speak up, even if it goes against the grain of what everyone else is saying or doing, and just say, okay, maybe I don't know, but this is what I'm thinking. This is what I'm thinking. Here's my thought process. Here's all the other things, And so I grew up in a family that had one income earner. My dad worked his butt off to feed and clothe 4 of us. And we didn't go without. And they supported, everything that was important to them, which was education was number one. You were expected to do the best in school. We did piano, obviously, being a Chinese family. We did piano for many, many years. And we did sports. So sports, school, and music were the 3 pillars of growing up. And it was a hard childhood. I didn't really understand it when I was growing up because it was tough. We didn't go out. We friends weren't really allowed over. We were to focus on our studies and to get the best grades and work as hard as we could because they didn't have the opportunity. And so when they saw that in Canada, if you worked hard and you sacrificed for your future, you could get somewhere. And so they sacrificed their life for us in terms of providing us. We all went to university. And so I got a full scholarship graduating out of high school. I got the Governor General's Academic Medal. And again, when I say these things, this is not to boast, or this is just some facts to show you that I might have some acumen to maybe discern some things. But I won all the back then we had OEC, so it was like 5 years of high school. I won all the science awards, and I graduated with like a 99 point something average, and came to Queen's on full scholarship. Doing concurrent education, 2 degrees at once, concurrent education and pre-med. As a Chinese family, I was expected to go to medical school. And I failed miserably at that because by the 3rd year, I had decided I'm going to finish my honors in 3 years because I had done summer courses throughout the years. And I did my Bachelor of Education my 4th year and then took a year off to go to Australia to train in triathlons because I was heavily into sports at that time. And I didn't really know what to do with my life because I didn't really want to at that point to work as hard as I've had at that point. And so I applied to do a master's in gene cloning, which I had already done many years with the head of science here at Queen's. For about 3 years in my undergrad, I worked for David Dennis doing gene cloning. And so the deciding factor was I applied for the NSERC scholarship, which is from the National Research Council of Canada that was only awarding these awards to, I think the top 1% of graduate students. And I said, if I get the award, then I guess I have to come back from Australia and start my master's. And if I don't, then I'm going to be a vagabond and just travel the world a little bit and train. And damn it, I got the letter, I think April or May of that year of 97, I think. And they said, oh, you got to come back because my prof emailed me and he said, yeah, you. And he loved it because it was free money for him, right, for his lab. And back then and even now, people's labs in terms of research, they're run like a business. They have to have income, and it's usually grants that they do year round that they're thinking about publishing papers. And so if they can get free work, i.e. a graduate student, a master's students to come in that is paid their own way, they love it, right? And so that's how my journey started very deeply already in first year university in terms of understanding biochemistry and the human body. Now, over the last couple of years, I have also learned that what I was taught was wrong, and that there's many things that I wish my profs would have taught me better. My life would probably have been different, but it is what it is. Hindsight's 2020. But I did 15 years of gene cloning, and my prof was the first person to open up a biotech company in Canada called Performance Plants. And it's still running through many reiterations, but he certainly taught me how to be critical in my thinking, to question differences in opinion, to be able to debate, to be able to bring information that you gather up, and to listen to every single voice. Everyone has a voice to bring to the table, whether it doesn't matter your credentials, doesn't matter, in science, we always say, everyone is equal player. Let's debate the topic and not the person, right? Let's debate what you bring to the table. And sadly, like I said, just recently in the last couple of years, that has not been done with, a certain virus that has been going around. And that's been very sad to me, being a person who's been immersed in the sciences. And so my education has been very rigorous, if you want to call it. And it's all because of my parents, right? They had super high standards. I also have my piano performer's degree from the Royal Conservatory, had my associateship of piano performance. And I did that before I left for university. That's one past grade 10. If those people out there are taking your Royal Conservatory levels in piano, and it was just normal to me to do 3 hours of practice a day when I was in grade 13, while working 20 hours a week, being a lifeguard, while trying to pull the highest marks, So I didn't really know much difference in terms of trying to get the most out of life. And I have my parents to thank for that. That's why the pool building was just another, piece of the puzzle. It's not that I was a pool builder. It's just like, it was a challenge. It was like, oh, it's just, you buy a kit and you do this. Oh, I think I could do that.
Yeah. I'm glad you make that discernment, because I've had many people say, oh, I heard you built a pool. And I say, yeah. And then further down the conversation, they say, and yeah, so who did you use to do it? So everyone says they built a pool, whether they actually did it themselves or not. So, like, to be clear to the audience, Caillou and I built our own pools with our, 2 sets of hands.
Yeah, we basically ordered the kit, we dug the hole, we went through every step. It wasn't just hiring a company to build a pool. It was like, we were the company, right? We were the general contractors. We were in the ditches. We were in the, doing the concrete, the plumbing, the, thinking about all the electrical, and it was really, again, I like challenges, and throughout my life, I think that's something that I think the viewers may get some courage to do is, my saying always to my buddies is like, this expert is like in whatever field is doing electrical or plumbing. And my statement is always, they might be experts, but they're humans. So they must have learned it at some point. And I'm human. So I should be able to, maybe give me a little bit of time and practice. And I should be able to, maybe not come to the same expertise level in such a short time, but in time, I should be able to be confident enough to do some of these things with my hands, or to learn any topic in any area. It might take me a while, but I'm confident enough that, it might take me in some lower levels, right? Obviously, I'm not going to be a rocket scientist or any of these other things that really require genius level of not only dedication, but, I'm certainly aware of my limitations. But I think most people aren't tapping into their potential just because of maybe a fear or lack of courage to tackle something that is insane, right? If you think about it, it's like, I'm sure you've had this from other people when you say you built your other pool, and they actually understand that you built your own pool. You get that glassy, glazed over looks like, whoa, what do you mean you built your pool, right? And
they normally can't find the second question. I have had
Yeah.
people say, you must really love your kids. And originally I would say, I love my kids. I built them a pool. But then as I've thought about it more and more, like I could have paid somebody to build a pool, but I felt like at that moment in my life, I needed a big challenge. So it was as much for me as it was for them.
Yeah. And, me being the stupid guy that likes to hit my head against the wall, probably at that time when, when that kind of challenge kind of came up, it probably wasn't, probably should have just passed on that in terms of building that pool, because it was right into the years when my parents got hit by a car and they got quite sick, and they required quite a lot of care through. We had to move them up to Kingston, and my mom suffered for a number of years, and she passed a couple of years ago. And then my wife got breast cancer at that same time. But I didn't know any better. I was just plow through it. Let's try to get through it and do the best I can. And maybe it was great because it also took, my mind off things, because I had 3,000 square feet of interlocking to do. And it was just some place where I could just go out. Ben's going, yep. It was just, sometimes it was therapeutic. Wouldn't you say? Like, it was hard work, but sometimes it was just like, you're just out there cutting stone, or you're just out there using your hands, and you feel so satisfied. Didn't you feel satisfied at some days when you came home, like when you came in, you're super tired, you're spent?
I felt very satisfied most of the time. And the interesting thing is once I finished that project, and there was more projects that had to do with the backyard that were kind of optional. Sometimes I found it a little harder to get going, but with that pool, it's kind of like that saying, burn the boats. So if you want to take over an island, take your boat there, burn the boat, because then you'll figure out how to take over the island because you can't get home. So it was kind of like that. As soon as that first scoop of dirt came out of the ground, the boats were burned. So then the option of doing the work escaped my mind. And that's where I really got to enjoy it. But, I definitely, I want to keep hearing more about your background. I know our audience wants to hear about your entrepreneurial journey with Altitude Tech and anything else in the health world. So why don't we jump back on that?
Sure. So, back in the, I was also, like I said, my parents really pushed sport and really didn't give us any limits, which is, a gift that is very special to me, again, because I don't really view many limits. I certainly understand that some people have physiological limits, and but I think that, again, the potential is so high that a lot of people leave a lot of that potential on the table, shall we say? Because when I was 12 years old, I had finished an Olympic distance triathlon, and for our viewers to understand that, at 12 years old, I swam a K and a half. I biked 40 Ks and I ran 10 Ks because I didn't know any better. My older brother had done it the year before. And so I thought, well, shit, if he can do it and he survived, he didn't die, well, surely I can do it. Right. And so, again, that mentality of using trailblazers and trail breakers to give you confidence to do that. But, I was heavily into sports. So when I came to university in 93 at Queen's, I continued to swim for Queens and I continued to do triathlons. I had some success. But always looking at the science about training, the science of sport, the science of health, to try to make myself faster, and accumulated to the point where when I started teaching, and this is a funny story. When you have an NSERC scholarship, you're not supposed to work anywhere else because you're supposed to dedicate yourself to your research. But I had finished my Bachelor of Education, and one of my training buddies, Sarah Conflower, her mom was a principal at KCVI. And she knew I was a teacher, but I didn't have a job. And this was like 98-ish, 99, 98, when I was supposed to come back to start my master's. And that was when the teachers were on strike because I think Harris had legislated them back to do 4 classes with no prep, which is atrocious in terms of, we can talk about education later. But anyways, the collective agreement came out. They went on strike. the government capitulated. And so they went back to a 3 out of 4 with 1 spare, which is exactly how things were and are running right now. And so lo and behold, there's sections that pop up. And they needed a teacher right away because the collective agreement was, or the strike had forced the hands of the government. And so Sandy Conflower, which was the principal at KC, knew that I had a job. I was free, quote unquote free, and I had my teacher qualification. So she called me up in the lab one day, and she said, "Hey, I got one class for you, a grade 10 applied science class." I still remember that. And, being the naive kid, I didn't really understand that opportunity she was offering me, because it was like a full-time position that I would be had at the board. And guess what I said? Let me think about it, because I was like, I don't really want to, not that, I cared about getting in trouble with my prof. It was just like, I didn't really want to, crowd my training hours. And I just heard something on the other end of like silence, because she was like, I'm offering you a full-time job. And I knew she wasn't impressed when there was silence on the other end. She said, well, tell me by this afternoon. It was in the morning. And obviously I thought about it for a couple hours and I called her back and said, yeah, I'll take it. And that started my journey into teaching. But my prof didn't know. Dave Diddens didn't know for a number of months. And I would show up late because it was first period, right? And I would always be in at around 11. And after a couple months, he pulled me in and he's like, I know you're working. As long as you get your work done and your research done, I could care less, right? And he was great about it. And it was only one class in the morning, but that started my journey into teaching. During all those years, I also had, when I started teaching, I met a really good friend, who is still a good friend, Bob Turk, who taught physics. He's probably one of the best physics teachers in Kingston. And we really kicked it off really well, because I had just started doing a ton of research into sports and into technology. And back then, heart rate monitors were already a very novel thing, like a EKG with a strap around you that pumped it out onto your watch. And I remember buying, back then I had spent, it was a fortune for me as a student to buy this heart rate monitor. Polar was the brand that was the brand and only brand back then, and they were made in Finland, like one of the top companies in the world that was making these ECG accurate with a chest strap onto your watch, and it came with a little booklet about how to train. And again, it was another eye opener for me, because it really talked about that you don't really have to train that hard. You just need to make sure that your intensity zones are appropriate for your distances. And that was a novel thing for me, because throughout my sporting career, it was always taught that no pain, no gain. Like if you don't suffer and you're not ready to die at the end of a workout, then that workout is useless and you're a wimp, right? Like, well, how dare you waste my time if you're just not puking on the pool deck?
Yeah.
And this book just through science, and it showed, two runners, I still remember this book, because it really showed two runners. One runner just killed himself every day. And this other runner used heart rate to moderate their intensity. And over a period of 2 or 3 months, they went to a race. And the runner that went as hard as they could did horribly, because they were training the wrong energy systems. And the runner that moderated it and did tempo running and right at threshold, something that is not like killer, but like, moderately hard to the point where you just don't really want to talk anymore, that kind of intensity was really novel to people. But you could use a heart rate monitor to gauge yourself. And so one day I just left the monitor on Bob's desk, because he was also a very cerebral guy. And he used to be a swimmer and he used to be a mountain biker. But, for the years of overtraining, basically, he gave up, because he was in his 30s and late 30s. And he thought, you know what, I just can't go out here and do this intensity anymore, because I'm just getting old, And he thought, what many people thought, that if I can't go out here and kill myself with a high intensity, then I might as well not be training. So all I did is I left the heart rate monitor on his desk and left the book for him. And after a week, he came back and he's like, KY, you've changed my life. It's like, I enjoy riding again, because I can understand that riding easy is actually beneficial for me. And so, all the enjoyment came back and it was sustainable, and he got back into shape, right? He literally got back into exercising because he could do it properly with a little bit of injection of science. And so he was just flabbergasted at, how just a little technology, a little bit science could help humans become better, and to be able to find the lost art and to find the love of exercising again, where it really dispelled dogma, right, of what coaches were trying to tell us, is that no pain, no gain. Well, that was quickly thrown out. And so, at that point, we became really good friends, because we always discussed so many things together, like what we're going to discuss between you and I in our journey together, that those kind of same discussions. But this was like almost 30 years ago, of like talking about, lactate testing, and like, okay, why if we started a for-profit lab, and at that point I was already coaching a lot of athletes through triathlon. I had like 30 some athletes that I was coaching a month. It was actually an incredible income. If I think I was charging $100 a month, and I had 30 athletes, so you do the math back then. I was making, for a guy that wasn't supposed to work, I was teaching, I was coaching.
Or coaching your athletes.
Yeah, I was coaching athletes, and at that point we started a business together, called Try Science. And we actually bought laboratory equipment, which we ran, that actually brought athletes in. We had a treadmill, we had a ergometer that you could bring your triathlon bike in, or your cycling bike in, and we would put you through this ramp test and correlate it with your heart rate. And so everyone got a heart rate monitor also. And we would take a little bit of blood and measure how much lactate was coming out and graph it. And so we can metabolically see where you're starting to burn sugars, and where you need to be at your optimal level, so you don't overtrain. And back then it was very novel to have this kind of insight into your own body metabolically, and to be able to individualize each of these training protocols. And so, and many people laughed at us for years, right? That we were offering this, and we ran it for a number of years. And during that time, that's when I bought my first altitude tent, because I couldn't travel to altitude, like say to Boulder, Colorado, or anywhere else to, in every single world champion or good athlete has stints at altitude where, the reduced oxygen that you're getting will cause your body to produce more red blood cells. Your mitochondria gets better. Your muscle becomes more efficient. You drive your genetics to be a much more aerobic machine, and leaner, all these other great things. But back then, it was just the start of the advent of these simulated altitude tents, which basically got away with that old technology where you had to sleep in this kind of tube, and they actually suck the air out to create the vacuum that actually simulated altitude. The technology that came out at that point, that was probably popularized by a guy by the name of Sean Wallace, was basically something called normal baric hypoxia, which means that there was no change in pressure. And all we did is we stripped away the oxygen molecules to the point that was equivalent to the altitude that you wanted to sleep in. Makes sense, right? So if you're at 9,000 feet, and right now at sea level, we're at 21% oxygen. So what I would do is I would create a tent that you would sleep in over your bed, pretend that you're camping, and this machine would pump in the equivalent of 9,000 feet of oxygen, which is about 15%. So it would strip away about 6% of the oxygen that you and I are breathing right now at sea level. And it was amazing. Like after 4 weeks, I was running personal bests. My physiology completely changed. But those things back then was insanely expensive. Like I think I paid $6,000 US back then in 98, 99. So you can imagine, in today's terms, for a student, that was equivalent to probably spending $20,000 right now on something, right? Taking a flyer. Yeah. And so, after a year and a half of doing that, where I really got it, well, Try Science really wet my feet in terms of, learning to get a GST number, billing, all these other things already. And I had a great partner to do that with. And Bob's wife, Elizabeth, also taught with us. She taught chemistry at KCVI for many years. And she would do our books and help us through the back end of teaching us how to get business numbers and, having to, like I said, the end of the year taxes, right? And report your GST every quarter or every year. And I had no idea even about taxes. Like, what the heck? What do you mean I got to charge the taxes and do the dirty work of the government for them? I'm like, I don't get to keep it. Nope, you don't get to keep it. You're just doing the work of the government. You're stealing from the people and you're going to give it to the government, right?
Yeah.
And just learning about business acumen, like, marketing. What are we going to do? And quickly you kind of figure out, like, man, I better mind my P's and Q's here and be as efficient as I can, because you can blow all your profit into marketing and nothing comes back in return, which happened a number of times where it's like, oh shit, I did not spend that marketing dollars very well. And so you have metrics of seeing which ones come back. And so it was a learning process, right? And then obviously, we're pushing around the 2000 year mark, the changeover. And that's where I met my wife, Janice. And I was running swim clinics at that point and we built this awesome underwater cart back then to film people as they swam along the water. And we call it the Canada Arm, because we built this contraption, battery power. Back then it was just, there's no GoPros, right? Right now everyone's got a camera that's waterproof that can do 1080p or higher resolution. You can just dip it in the water and you can get anything you want. It's on SD card. Back then there was nothing, right? And so I built this swim cart that ran on a 12-volt car battery that had an inverter that changed that 12 volts into 120 volts AC. So you had to have a AC square wave inverter. It wasn't a true sine wave. And then what it ran is it powered one of the first LCD screens that I remember seeing. And I paid, I think, like $500 for this little LCD screen that could show, it wasn't very thin, but back then it was very thin. Yeah. And I paired it up with a camera underwater, and I put a VHS recorder on this cart, right? And so when we was running swim clinics, I would be able to put their tape. We had tape for everybody, right? That signed up for the swim clinic. We put it into the recorder and we tell them to swim 2 laps, down and back. And we would record them. And then we would have a debriefing session where we would show them, here's what you look like, and here's what Michael Phelps, or back at that in those ages, it was Alexander Popov, it was Ian Thorpe. If you're in the swimming world, you'll know these guys.
Yep. I remember
multiple Olympians that won multiple gold medals. And it was a stark comparison. It's like, all right, you can see these guys, their technique, and look at your technique. So let's find a way. And we would have a system of taking you from a beginning swimmer so that we would focus on technique and only technique to, on first principles to get you to a very proficient swimmer, right? And there was nothing like that again around back then. And at that point, like I said, that's where I met my wife. I gave her a free swim clinic because I had the hots for her, and it was a great way. It was a great way to see girls in bathing suits. I told her later on, it was like, this is a good way to get you. And she did triathlons back then too, so it was a great way to meet people. And a few years down the road, that's when I realized that, I want to have a family, I want to have kids, and the way that my business was running at that point, it required a ton of one-on-one, because if you're coaching 30 athletes, there's no way of getting around having to be on 24/7 basically. Right. Yeah. And then I was away a lot of times too for business, because I was hired by a lot of the top professional cycling teams on a professional tour. Lance Armstrong's team back then was one of our rivals. I consulted for them. T-Mobile, CSC Tiscali. Back then, if you know cycling, these were the top of the top cycling teams in the world. And so I traveled to Italy a number of times, into Europe, to bring a lot of these technologies over to educate them on, altitude tents, on lactate testing, on even nutrition of a lot of these guys would not know anything about this because they just didn't have the background of any education. A lot of these riders were, I hate to label people, but they were blue collar, salt of the earth workers that if they didn't get a professional cycling job, they'd be working in a factory 24/7, like literally. So they finished high school and that was it. And and obviously the life of a professional cyclist is much more attractive than working in a factory. And so they just bring that kind of education over to riding, and they would just go and just kill themselves riding, and they wonder why they wouldn't improve. They're tough as nails, man. Like they were tough as nails. I felt sorry for a lot of them because the longest contract you're going to get as a professional cyclist is 1 year, basically back then, 1 year. So imagine feeding your family on a 1 year contract, and they get paid like pennies. Like I think like back then, and they were biking like 40,000 Ks or miles a year. At least 40,000 Ks a year. And a lot of them had injuries that they didn't want to tell management, because if they told management they had injury, they'd be cut. They didn't have a job. And so there's better ways, right? And there was a lot of doping back then too, right? And so to show them, like, maybe you don't need to dope as much if you use an altitude tent, or you looked at your protein intake and you looked at your iron intake, right? That your level of performance could go up, right? And back then it was just rife with EPO, this kind of miracle drug that, again, the altitude tent naturally stimulates the bone marrow to produce EPO, which is a hormone that makes more red blood cells. And so that's the foray into starting my own business of altitude tents, because to make it more affordable, and for something else that I was passionate about that I used, right, and that I knew helped people and to help athletes. And since then, and it's been over 20 years since I started Altitude Tech, which was a spin-off from Tri Science. And we've built probably 50 chambers for universities over the years. I'm just finishing up right now a chamber, and these environmental chambers for universities can go from minus 40 degrees Celsius, minus 40, to plus 40. And then any altitude from sea level, probably all the way up to 20,000 feet. So basically we can recreate, if you spin a globe on your finger and you just kind of put your finger anywhere on the globe, we can pretty much replicate that kind of conditions. And, this has been used for a lot of different modalities that help with, just everyday living. Like we did one down at Brock University, and they did a lot of testing for the Coast Guard, the survival suits. And, obviously a lot of clients are mountain climbers that climb Mount Everest. I've had a lot of clients use our tents before they went to Everest. So they were already pre-acclimated, so they could, skip the 4 weeks at base camp. Right. And so it saved them hundreds of, thousands of dollars, let's just say, because, to buy a tent would be like $3,000, but to stay at base camp for 4 weeks to acclimate would be probably $50,000 for them. Right. And then it took them away from family and everything else. And so with this technology, they could do it at home, still live, right, and just sleep at altitude. And then when the time came to when the window opened, say late April, early May, bam, they could fly over and they'd be acclimated. And so then they could go right up to the top, because our machines can go up to, I've built machines for, probably 25,000 feet, almost 30,000 feet. Some of the interesting things that I've built stables for horse racing.
Really?
Yes.
I did not know that.
Yes. Yeah. There's so many things that I can't even think about right now that we've done. Is like there's a number of local guys that did a lot of harness racing that was into science, and they're like, "Hey, KY, I hear that you're doing this for humans. What will this work for horses?" I'm like, "Damn right. If you breathe oxygen, and I stress you with low oxygen, you will adapt." Right. One of the favorite sayings in training that my training buddies and I always kind of joke about is like, you'll adapt or you'll die, one or the other. You'll either adapt if you keep on doing this, even though it's painful, or you'll die. But we haven't died yet. So you'll adapt, right, to whatever load it is, right? And so, so we've built, and there's, obviously when harness racing was much bigger in Ontario, I think they've taken away a lot of the gaming kind of funding in the last 10 years. To support that kind of, I think there's a lot of gambling in there too, which I wasn't into, but I was just into the physiology of improving equine performance. And they saw incredible, and the horses put us humans to shame. Like I could put them to close to Everest altitudes and they'd be fine. They'd just be like, yeah, whatever. And they would, if we put you and I to even close to that, we would have altitude sickness. We'd end up in the hospital. But these horses, like even the lowest quality horse, would just put a human to shame. The amount of blood that they have. They have this huge spleen with a bag of blood that when they exercise, the spleen squeezes and all the blood goes into circulation. So it's kind of like an unfair advantage. We have a spleen too, but we don't have that huge reserve of red blood cells that a horse does. But we could see that the spleen was actually squeezing when we put them up at altitude, because it was creating this kind of cardiovascular challenge that the horse was perceiving. And so they would get the spleen squeeze every time they went up to altitudes. It was really challenging them. And their performance obviously increased significantly. But that, we've done some pretty interesting projects of, making altitude things. And then the last couple of years, and again, I don't know if it's serendipitous or, again, I think you kind of make your own luck too, right? And even up to that point, I dabble a little bit on the other side of things, right? So altitude training is low oxygen, when I take oxygen away from you. And I dabbled in the mid 2000 about contemplating on starting another company that made hyperbaric chambers, which is high oxygen, which you would climb into the chamber and would pressurize it and give you oxygen. But I couldn't get the manufacturing going, so I just kind of shelved it. But I kind of knew a little bit about, I had already knew a little bit about the hyperoxygen side, but hadn't touched it for probably 13 or 14 years until my wife got breast cancer in 2018. And sorry, I'm just gonna disconnect this. In 2018, the reason why I got back into the oxygen space is because my wife got cancer. And so cancer cells actually do not survive in high oxygen environments. And lo and behold, it was easy for me to retool my generator so that they can actually put out high oxygen. And so it was, instead of low oxygen, we could do high oxygen quite easily. And she, through her treatment, used this one protocol where she would exercise with huge amounts of oxygen that was collected in this 1,000-liter bag. And so, again, I had all the parts at my fingertips to be able to help her on her journey. And since then, I've connected with a distributor that sells these systems, and we've sold hundreds now in the last 2-3 years to people looking for better health. And basically, it's an oxygen generator that you can collect in a huge bag, and then all you do is you exercise with a mask and draw down this 1,000-liter bag. And it has, I can go into the physiology, but it can really heal you tremendously with any injuries, blunt force traumas, any surgeries. And we have some time, so I'll just quickly talk about why that works. Is that as we age, and we get back to this inflammation talk that we're going to talk about, is through diet and through environment and through maybe bad luck, you might injure your body at the distal ends of your body, like say your hands and your feet. And diabetics certainly see that when they have super high blood sugar, is that the high blood sugars have damaged their arteries and capillaries, which are the small kind of vessels at the ends of your feet and your hands, so badly that no blood can go down there. And the only remedy basically is for amputation, because once they get cut, they'll get infected, they'll get gangrenous. And if they don't cut that limb off, they'll die. They'll die of sepsis. Right. And so that's why a lot of diabetics lose their limbs. They run into diabetic retinopathy, which is basically blindness, because the blood vessels in the back of your eyes are also quite tiny. And the high blood sugar will also damage them. Same with kidney disease. A lot of people think that, you're having so much protein, KY, you're going to damage your kidneys. Well, that's not the science. The science shows that it's high sugars that damage your kidneys. The nephrons that are so tiny, again, these small blood vessels with the high sugar is what damages your kidneys. It's not protein, right? And so what exercising at super high oxygen does is once you've damaged these capillaries down to the point where they actually swell, you can't get red blood cells through there to provide the oxygen. And the number one need for oxygen down past this kind of choke point is something called sodium potassium pump, which requires a lot of ATP, which is the energy currency of the cell, which you need oxygen for. And I usually use an analogy that this sodium potassium pump for the cell and the lining of the cell, which is only one cell thick, is basically like a bilge pump in a boat. If you have some leaky water, this bilge pump will continue to pump the water out to keep your boat afloat. Well, this potassium sodium pump is really important, even though it requires a lot of ATP to drive it. But what it does is it creates the homeostasis of the cell so it doesn't swell. What happens is that we don't have enough oxygen, the cell will swell. And what happens is that when it swells, your capillaries, the volume of the capillaries gets down to the point where no red blood cells can get through. There's still fluid flowing through there, and that's your plasma that's flowing through there. But no red blood cells will, because they're too big to flow through there. So, Manfred van Arden is the guy that wrote this one manuscript in German, which I have. And back in the 1930s, he already discovered this. He discovered that if you exercise with high oxygen, so that you can put oxygen into the fluid that's still flowing through these damaged capillaries, so you can put oxygen through this fluid through exercise. And the reason why you need to exercise is that you need to increase the CO2 in your system so that your capillaries don't clamp down. If you only sit there and you breathe oxygen, your capillaries will actually clamp down because you have too much oxygen for the environment. So you can't drive the oxygen down to your feet, which are damaged through whatever trauma, right? And so when you do this exercising with oxygen, he showed that after just one session, one 30-minute session with breathing through he only used like 35 or 40% oxygen. We're using 90% oxygen, right? And you're exercising for 30 minutes at a moderate intensity, that he could reverse the swelling. Because as we're driving the heart to a higher volume and a higher heart rate, we're pushing this oxygenated fluid down to the capillaries and giving those cells the oxygen to be able to create the energy to drive that bilge pump again. So when this bilge pump starts working, it unswells, right? And once it unswells, guess what can flow through there again? Red blood cells, right? And so you don't need this modality anymore once you fix the root cause, right? It's not like something that you need to come back to all the time. He showed that with one session, you could keep these capillaries, these damaged capillaries, open for over a year with one session. And so with this kind of knowledge, my wife did this through all of her surgeries, and the surgeons just could not believe the healing rate of her surgeries, right? But because we could open up she had multiple surgeries where the skin was just completely cut open, right? And I said to her, she would love to have a podcast with you, Ben, just to share her journey and just to give hope to other women who have gone through the same things. And maybe women that are going through it right now might get some help in some other ideas to say, hey, maybe there's some other additional things I can do and not just the traditional things that obviously certainly help. But there's definitely misgivings in terms of some blind spots that they don't cover because we're really focused on pharmaceuticals in the Western medicine. Not saying that they don't help. I'm just saying there's some other things that definitely can improve wellness of a patient, and not just having pharmaceuticals or surgeries to cure everything. But through the use of oxygen, which again was a result of doing altitude training for in the business for 15 years, is what got me into that quite quickly. So we did through COVID. We pivoted, and we retooled all of our machines to provide oxygen machines for COVID patients. And a lot of hospitals didn't have any stock, and we had our banner year in the last 2 years. And so in business, what I learned through the last 20 years also is that you got to be flexible, and you got to be able to move quickly, be able to, I think the key word was pivot, right? You got to pivot fast. If you see something that is not to snuff, or you see an opportunity, you got to grab it, or else it's gone. And first to market, or first to the solution, I think a lot of people don't understand the power of that, and I certainly had a lot of help through the years of picking people's brains that were already in the entrepreneurial space. One other little tidbit: I was actually on Dragon's Den. I don't know if you knew that. Many years.
I did know that.
The funny thing is my kids are coming home now because all their buddies are showing it. Hey, your dad's on Dragon's Den. It's all on YouTube or so. And it's season 2, episode 3. So if your viewers are interested, you can see my pitch with Altitude Tech on there. They didn't invest because, they thought I was going to kill people, and it's made for TV, right? The snippet that you see, the 5-minute snippet, is all the highlights and the most exciting parts. But it was an incredible experience. I still have a lot of friends that actually saw JP Shearer at Front Park about a couple of weeks ago, and he became a lifelong friend because he actually coached me through Kedco before I went on the show to tell me, like, maybe we had some dry runs of the questions that I would ask. I was just a nascent scientist. Like, I didn't really know, like, P&Ls.
I didn't realize JP was doing that back then. I'm a big fan of JP.
So I saw him. He was kayaking or paddleboarding on Salmon Lake. We had rented kayaks and kayak for a day with Janice's dad. Rented kayaks for a day, and he was just pulling in. We were both pulling at the same time, and gave him a high five, and told my kids, hey, this guy kind of saved me. So he was working for Kedco back then. And then now he's at this Smith School of Business.
He runs the innovation entrepreneurship program.
Yeah. So same kind of thing that we're talking about today. And so it was a great learning lesson. And again, I wasn't going to go into it. I wasn't going to do it. But the tryouts were at St. Lawrence College, and I came home and. One day, and Janice, my wife, she was like, you know what, you should just bring your one generator and just go and just tell them what it is, because I'm like, well, they're not gonna, it's such a friggin' crazy thing. Like, they're not gonna want, I made it to the next round. Next thing they know was like, yeah, you're gonna be on TV. I'm like, what do you mean I'm gonna be on TV? So again, you never know. I hope the viewers can see that you kind of make your own luck. You just kind of, you go to you do the best you can with everything you got, and hopefully once something sticks, right? And doors open that you don't know. And again, like my other business, if you talk about getting your feet wet, is in 2009, we decided to get into the rental business. Again, I had this crazy idea. It's like, maybe we should buy a student rental, just to diversify our portfolio, right? And my kids were quite young back then, and I didn't know what I was getting into, but there I was on the sidewalk, auctioning in an auction, like literally an auction, with a house with Gordon's Auctions, with Alicia and Barry. Yeah. And fantastic. At that point, my wife was freaking out, but I had already many years. In 2009, there was already probably 10 years where I was already a first adapter of something called eBay. Because back then, it was really weird for people. It's like, what is this eBay thing? Like, and instantly when I saw it, I'm like, oh, this is the bomb. Like, I love it. And I would get deals left, right, and center, and have it shipped to me. And then I also was the first adapter of PayPal. Because PayPal, if you know the story of Elon Musk, yeah. And I had a gut feeling. It's like, man, I should invest in these companies because I really think that this is the future. This was back in like late 90s, right? And so I kind of kicked myself and kind of learned, it's like, you know what, maybe I should trust my instinct a little bit more, And so in 2009, I said, I think we should get into the student rental business, right? But it was all so foreign to me, right? I'm like, I've never bought another house. Like, this is really weird. I've only bought like, at that point, Janice had bought our first house. She had bought it already, and we moved into it. And then we bought another house together. But I had never really gotten to the foray of like a property owner, and certainly not sitting there, raising your hand with $10,000 bids. And I already had a number in my mind, so I was fine with it. And because I had already known about eBay. And back then, I was already trying to game the system, because back then it was like, I had to sit around to the last minute and make sure I had a fast internet connection so I could outbid the last person. Like, I waited to like 10 seconds before I would click it. And then by the time I clicked it and the bid went in, it was already 2 seconds left, and the next guy couldn't rebid to win that item that I really wanted. But back then, there was already things like bots that would do the bidding for you. So there was one thing, I think it was called Jaybird Watch or something, that I used many times to scam the system to say, all right, I'm going to say 10 seconds before the auction ended, this is my maximum bid, and it would bid for me. And so I would win like so many things, and other people would like, how the hell did you, with 2 seconds left, put a bid in that would like win everything? And so for me, I was already accustomed to that kind of uncertainty in a kind of an auction environment. And so I was sitting there auctioning with this one house, and there's only after I think 130,000, there's only one person and I, but I had already walked through. It was a 4-bedroom house, and in the back was easily converted, was able to have another 3 bedrooms if you did just a little bit of work, but it was only sold as a 4-bedroom. So I saw a huge opportunity to turn it into a 7-bedroom student rental. And that started my foray into that business, which has been insane because, we've accumulated a number of rentals and commercial buildings and everything else. Right. And so I think the moral of the story again is trust your gut if you can, and you obviously work hard, but you never know if there's an opportunity that can come in that can change your life. And certainly the real estate market has changed our lives, especially in the last couple of years when you've seen what's happened with properties go up through I didn't know in 2009. I had no idea. I was just like, this might be good. This might be a good investment instead of, your tried and true pension and, your investment kind of route. And yeah, I always call like your rents are your dividends, but you work a little bit for them. Mm-hmm. But the appreciation of a house is pretty insane. You know what I mean? Like, especially in the last couple of years. And so I had no idea. And so one house became two became 3, and you can just kind of, leverage those to do what you need. And that was another very interesting kind of business that I never knew about, because it was very, immediately it was apparent to me that you could leverage. That's the interesting thing, is that if you invested in the stock market, you can't leverage. Once you buy a stock, no one's going to give you 80% of the value of that stock to reinvest in another stock. Mm-hmm. Right. So it was very interesting to me that a bank will give me 80% of the value of this house based on your income, based on the income of that house, so that you can have a line of credit to do, if your income would support it, to buy another property. I'm like, well, that is a huge advantage over buying stocks, right? Yeah, you don't have to do anything with stocks or the stock market, but the stock market also, like I said, won't give you 80% of your Apple stock and say, here's a line of credit, even though you pay a little bit of interest, but you can take 80% of your value of the stock and we'll give you cash for it, and you can invest it in something else, right? Yeah,
not going to happen.
No, I don't think so, right?
No.
And so I quickly, again, I like to think I'm, sometimes I'm stupid and made stupid decisions, and but I like to think I'm a fairly quick learner. And once I saw that, I was like, you know what? You could just kind of multiply this up and have a fairly good income and be secure for your future here on top of, and so even today's world, I'm still doing a lot of the grunt work, which I've kind of moved back from because my time is more valuable now. So I'm hiring more things out. But speaking of which, though, I still was at the rental last night with my 50-foot motorized snake, trying to fix a kitchen sink that was plugged. Yeah. I say stay real.
I borrowed that snake on Christmas Day last year.
Yeah. That's him. I forget about it.
My kids still talk about the Christmas Day we should forget, followed by the best Boxing Day ever.
I forget about that. Like that snake, I think I paid I bought it on eBay I bought it for like $110. And oh my God, I have used that snake. It owes me nothing, like zero. It could just disappear and I wouldn't be sad. But every landlord should have.
I've nicknamed that snake Santa Claus.
Yeah. So, like I said, it's been interesting because, through all the renovations and the properties, I've learned a ton of things. Like I'm pretty competent in pretty much every aspect of house building. Like I'm very confident if you say, okay, why you need to build a house? No problems. I can build a house. I can pour the foundation, I can do the electrical, I can do the plumbing, I can do the framing, I can do all the HVAC, I can do, all the, woodworking, all this other stuff. I know what needs to be done. And so I've learned a ton that way. In addition, a lot of people don't know is I also did the solar panel kind of project, the microfits, on two of my properties from cradle right up to it running. So I sourced out all the panels, all the inverters, all the electrical, did all my electrical myself, pulled out permits to do that. And I've got about almost 20 kilowatts DC of panels that I'm producing electricity for. And it's been, I think, 11 or 12 years now that the Ontario government pays me. And back then, the contracts were really lucrative. They're paying, and I'm still on that contract, 80.2 cents a kilowatt hour. We only pay 7 or 8 cents a kilowatt hour to use it. So they're paying multiples of 10 times. And the reason why I did it myself is that the payback was insane. Like, it was, if you hired a company to do it, it'd be, I think, 8 to 10 years for the payback.
I remember that.
But if I did it myself, the payback was like 4 years.
Yeah.
Right. And then the rest was gravy. And so I think I saved 50%. It was 100% more if I hired a company. So again, I didn't know anything about solar panels. Zero. I'm like, what the hell are these things? Like, what's a microfit? What do you mean on my own generator? What do you mean I have to put a dual meter base on my service? What do you mean I got to call PUC and have them come and disconnect my service and have everything ready to reconnect, or else they won't reconnect you and you have no power? And so I learned all that. Like, I put a double meter base on my house, on two houses, right from scratch, and learned how to, again, a lot of this stuff I sourced from eBay. They wanted, like, I don't know, something insane, like $800 for this disconnect. And I sourced it out for $100 on eBay, and just being frugal and being resourceful has been incredible. Like, I sourced all these panels and inverters and all these things out, and learned about shipping and over the years, I've met a lot of great friends and a lot of contractors too that have become my friends in doing these projects. And my one good friend, Jason Morris, every time he sees my number, he probably shakes his head. It's like, what is KY into now? Because he's been my right-hand man to almost every single project. And he's like, man, I've done flat roofing with you. I've done insulation on the roof. I've done EPDM. I've done microfit solar panels with you. I've built a pool with you. I've, done this crazy deck with the glass railings and restructure numerous houses. And so it's been great to work with a lot of awesome human beings too that are, and again, he's a typical example of a super intelligent guy. He's not book smart, shall we say, but he's one of the most intelligent humans that I've met. And this is, again, speaking from my teacher's hat, is that we've done a big disservice for our viewers out there in terms of propagating a theory or kind of a false pretense that if you don't go to university, then you're a failure, that everyone needs to go to university regardless of what you're doing, or else you're a failure. And we don't push the need for our trades, right? How hard was it for you to find competent tradespeople, Ben, when you're building your pool?
Very hard. Which is why of the few things that I thought I might get help with, most of them I end up doing myself.
My point. And it's sad because there's a lot of these kids, and I've taught from applied level all the way to academic, 9 to 12, the range of the sciences, biology, chemistry, math, physics. But I really enjoyed teaching the applied level classes where it was down to earth kids that had a different learning acumen. And it wasn't that they were not intelligent. They were superbly intelligent. Just the way that they learned was different. And they could use their hands in terms of making things and actually physically manifesting something that, maybe a lot of the academic kids could not do. And we need that in society. Like, who's going to build your houses? Who's going to build your highways? And who's going to be in the sewers? Who's going to be on your roof, right? And we kind of look down on these manual jobs, right? We look down and we don't give the same accolades as, all these other things that require maybe some more years of university. And certainly in a business sense, if you looked at your career as a business in terms of money making, I would say if you come out with a degree that is not employable, I would highly double think that before you do that. You're going to come out with over $100,000 in debt, because now university every year is at least 25. By the time my kids go in a couple of years, it's going to be 30. So you're going to come out with $100,000 in debt, and interest rates are not cheap. As we know, it's already creeping up, to 3 to something, and they're not going to come down anytime soon. So you're paying interest on over $100,000. You have no prospect of an actual job except for a minimum wage job. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Okay. I don't want people to think that I'm elitist. I'm just saying we always have to start at somewhere and move up, right? I've certainly have done that, done the grunt work and, rolled up my sleeve, still doing it. Having these kids go through trade school or electrician or plumbing or sheet metal work or, large machine operator or, any of these trades that we're in high need of, like HVAC and cement work, masonry work, certainly hard physically, right? Masonry work is super hard, but you also have to be super intelligent of how to do it, not just, throw rocks anywhere or make, you got to be able to be intelligent to make your form so that your slope is proper and to design the lay of the different slopes so that they match and, certainly requires some intelligence, right? And as an entrepreneur, I'm very sad that area, and maybe things are changing, right? But I'm just very sad that we have, number one, did a disservice to those students and to those kids that certainly would have been quite successful in that area had we, presented it in a proper way and valued it the same way as we value other professions, right? And that's why I say to my kids, you don't need to go to university, but you better damn well have a job. And if you start in trade school right now, you'll be farther ahead financially than a university grad coming out with $100,000 in debt with no way of repaying it. In 4 years, you could be a master of something or close to it. You could, obviously you should aim to be at the top and maybe run your own business in say 10 years or 15 years, but you got to start somewhere and put your apprenticeship in. But you could have already have made, $60,000 to $100,000 a year in 4 years if you put your nose to the grindstone, and then you're not in debt. Plus, you've made all this money. Plus, you've already furthered your credentials to be able to, move forward in the next 10 years to maybe being your own boss. And that's what I love. I don't know. One of the parts that I love and hate sometimes is that I'm my own boss, right? I can pick and choose, and we can have this podcast in the middle of the day, right? Yeah. And, sometimes the business requires more of you, but I think as you get, more successful and you have more, say, financial resources, you can maybe delegate that, or you can just say, well, I pass. I know I can make more money there, but I'm good enough. You know what I mean? And value other things in your life, like your time or, time with your kids, time with your wife, time with your family. And certain times you kind of hate it because, come hell or high water, you got to be over there because business calls. But I never thought I would be an entrepreneur, to be honest. Like I never kind of ticked those boxes to say, man, I really enjoy all these things being an entrepreneur, right? It's the challenge. It's meeting people. I'm a people person, right? Or else I wouldn't be a teacher, right? I love people. I love learning about, your expertise and taking away what you can teach me, right? And certainly everybody I meet, I have that mentality to say, you might know something that I don't know. I'd love to learn. You know what I mean? And I might be wrong. I also is that maybe what you're saying is going to destroy my foundation of my understanding of what I've fully believed in for many years, like nutrition, which we can talk about in a little bit, is that, if it wasn't for my wife's cancer, my outdated, say poisonous or very ignorant understanding of nutrition and health would still be with me. And I would probably be suffering, the ill effects of not knowing that what real nutrition is, because I wouldn't have had an impetus, kind of like what you're saying about the boat burning, right? Mm-hmm. Is that I wouldn't have had the drive to dive into that, but when a loved one gets cancer and I have the skills to at least attempt the research and at least attempt to read everything about breast cancer, and it opened up my eyes to say, wow, KY, you were wrong. You were so ignorant and so wrong about so many things. And that's what really woke me up to say, if I was wrong about this, then I might be wrong about everything, And so And not that I wasn't open-minded before, but I certainly didn't have that in my forefront of my learning creed, shall we say, of like going into it and going like, okay, I could be wrong here, right? Well, let's talk about it. What do you think? Okay, that's interesting. Maybe I need to modify what I have as my paradigm so that I might benefit from what you know, right? And I always look at it as like this, is that if you inject what you think and what you have, then basically it's a gift from you to me, right? It's a gift from you to me. Why? Because I'm kind of sucking all the knowledge that you've spent all your life sacrificing for and working for, and you're able to tell me that I'm wrong. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And like, even like, I always thought I'm really open-minded, but I realized in the last couple of years that yes, I'm open-minded, but if I'm not aware of the questions I need to be answering, I can't be open-minded to the answers. So I think now it's about, being open and looking for those questions and thinking about like all the things that you do, in a day, or people around you, or decisions you make, and stop and saying, is this best serving me at every avenue? Because it's so easy just to think like, okay, like nutrition is food. I eat food. I'm still living. Okay, next thing. What can I work on next? And as entrepreneurs, I don't know if you go through this, but I think entrepreneurs will often say, okay, if someone says like, how's your personal life? 8 out of 10. How's your fitness? 8 out of 10. How's your financial stuff? Personally, 8 out of 10. How's your business building? 4 out of 10. We always, as entrepreneurs, go back to the business because we have so much focus there. And I'm not sure if it's like we're trying to live up to some standard that doesn't exist, or it's the area that we find the hardest, or we're always looking for that next thing. So the score is always low. I don't know how you view that, but
I think
that I'm uncovering.
Yeah, I think every entrepreneur, and I think it's a function of just being an entrepreneur, is that you're a risk taker and that you have at least some courage, correct? Well, I like to say is like you at least have some courage that you're willing to sacrifice a little bit for, right? Sure. And certainly I've come up with people that were not successful as entrepreneurs, and not saying that you can kind of tell, but they didn't have the organizational skills and they didn't know how to capture that by hiring it out, or they didn't know their deficiencies where they that they could remedy or cure with the hiring or pulling people in that knew that area, right? And so they certainly failed and they pumped a lot of money into it. But I think as entrepreneurs, we're always looking to be better, or else why would we leave a secure job? I asked you, right? Like, why would you leave a secure paying job that pays you 9 to 5, 40 hours a week? Most, again, like I could have been a teacher, and my wife just retired, and, being a teacher is an amazing job. You get, over $100,000 a year if you're 10 years into it, pension benefits, you get some downtime in the summer, right? Why would I leave that? Right? People sometimes want to say, yeah, and I just resigned, by the way. I just resigned this year too from teaching because Janice was retiring. They were going to force me back. And I was like, no, I don't really need it. My business is so crazy now. And I hadn't been back because of Janice's illness and my parents' illness in 5 years. So they're going to force me back to Napanee. I'm like, no, absolutely not. I'm not going to go to Napanee to teach. I don't need that. But why would I leave $100,000 job security? Because again, the union is quite powerful for teaching. If I didn't have an aspiration for something that's even better than that, does that make sense? Right?
Yeah.
And so
it's better for you, right? Not better.
Better for me. I'm not. Yeah. Again, it's not better for everybody, but I'm just saying, like for me, I'm willing to put it out on the line a little bit more, right? And to be able to risk it. Right. And if I'm not aiming for better, then why did I leave that job? And so I think we carry that, every entrepreneur, most entrepreneurs carry that with their assessment of what they're doing day to day. And they're hard on themselves, right? Because we want to be successful because we don't have a safety net and we don't have an employer. We are the employer. We feed our families with this, like literally. That's the scary thing for a lot of people. I'm like, do you understand that if I screw this business deal up, my family could suffer catastrophically? And certainly there was times when it's like, all right, I'm wiring this guy $150,000 US. It better work out, or else, it's not going to be good. And I've certainly made decisions where it was not great, and I lost like $30,000 or $40,000. And I was, in the end, I'm still in the black, and been very successful in terms of being able to support my family and to have a lifestyle that blends all this other stuff together, right? And I think that that's a characteristic of most entrepreneurs. Wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. There seems to be some common threads, and taking the skills that we have and our aspirations and wanting to try to build more for ourselves and our family is often at the core of it for many of us. I know that's what it was for me. I had a job, I had skills. I thought I could, I was very confident that I could go out on my own and do even better. And people thought I was crazy. Why would I go and do that? And I was so confident. And then I did that for many years, and I bought a business and sold it after 12 years. And when I sold that business, I had people saying, "You're crazy. Why would you sell that business and move on to the next thing? And what is the next thing?" And my answer was, "Well, I'm not sure right now, but I, again, know we're going to be fine." Because I didn't sell that business for forever money. And I sold it maybe 6 months after my second child was born. And my wife, we decided to keep off for 5 or 6 years so the kids wouldn't have to go to daycare. And in Canada, for anybody that's listening, teachers don't get paid when they don't work, unless it's a disability thing or something related around that. But if it's just a personal lifestyle choice, they don't get paid. So I had 2 babies at home, and I sold the company and was trying to figure out what was next for me. And I was 100% confident that we would figure it out and that it would be great. And it turned out I was right, but people thought I was crazy. So I don't think your story, your life story is very unique for sure, but I don't think your comments around, being okay with risk taking, and my comments as well is rare in the entrepreneurial world. I think most of the listeners, so the listeners that I expect to listen to this podcast generally are entrepreneurs in the health and wellness field. So I think so far they're going to really resonate with what we've been talking about. Your story's fascinating. Before we move on to I'm just going to make one. I'm going to make one more comment about, because you jotted my mind when you said you're confident even though you had nothing, right? Like basically that you're moving onto pastures of which you did not know what was laying ahead, and you gave up your comfort, right? You gave up the comfort and you embrace the unknown. But having the confidence is quite unique, because this is not unlike what I went through when I met my wife. Because at that point, I was 28 and she was 35. She had worked for a lot of years and saved that kind of typical, saved every paycheck, X number amount. And she had bought her first house by herself, right? And I had nothing because I was traveling the world. I was 28. I had still my businesses, but I hadn't saved anything because I was, living my childhood, shall we say, because, it was very oppressive in that way, not in the overall sense, because I'm very grateful for what my parents gave me, because I'm basically everything my parents made me. I hated it when I was growing up. I had a lot of acrimonious relationships with my parents, and after 10 years of seeing my shrink, that's helped a little bit. The thing that resonated with me when you said the confidence is that even though I had nothing, the joke is that when I met my wife, I had a 1992 MPV. It was my first car. One of my friends had sold it to me. Mazda MPV is awesome. We used to call that the Peaver.
The true 4x4, man. It's a true 4x4. I'll take that 4x4 over my Honda Pilot any day. The all-wheel drive sucks. I'm sorry, listeners. The MPV had a locking diff, was a true 4x4. It handled this in the snow like it was on railway tracks. The Honda Pilot, I'm sorry, it is a piece of junk in the snow. Anyways, I digress. But all I had was a futon, literally a futon. The joke is always like, KY had a futon and an MPV, and he met Janice. Janice had she was already put together. She had a house. She had just bought a brand new 99 Camry in 98. She bought it in 98, which I am still driving, by the way. So again, frugality. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Is I'm still driving a 1999 Camry that has 403,000 kilometers on it. It's my daily driver. I have fixed that thing. I have done all the timing belts a couple times, all the struts. I've worked on that thing. Again, car mechanics is another one of my quote unquote specialties of learning. And especially with the advent of YouTube, it has been amazing of what you can learn. It's truly what you can learn, right? But anyways, getting back to the comment is that I had nothing, but I was very confident, just like you were, to say, you know what, if it's just about making money, I can do that. But having a family, finding a partner, sharing my life with somebody, finding someone I love that loves me back at the same time, having kids, being with that, you can't buy, right? And so those were my currencies of things that were really important, that if I had a chance, I would not going to let that go. Money for me and, business and all these other things. Yes, I'm very passionate about it. But if I lost everything now, if I lost everything today, I'd be confident that I could rebuild. Does that make sense? You know what I mean? I was like,
I agree.
Yeah, I've done it. And especially, right? Especially now at 48 years old, the amount of experience I have, it'd be like, not that it would be easy, but it's certainly easier than when I was 28, right? Then I was 28, nascent, stupid, ignorant, know nothing. Yeah. And still had the confidence. And maybe that was just ignorant confidence to say, I'm going to be able to be okay. But I seriously I still remember I had this root confidence to go, it's only money. Like if you really want me to make money, I can make money any day. You know what I mean? And sure enough, and again, I worked hard too the last 20 years, right? And again, being frugal and trying to do everything myself, and again, there's a difference between cheap and frugal, right? I'm not cheap. If I can save things and find a better deal, and I still put money into things that I value. That people will go, well, why are you buying that, or why are you supporting this charity or whatnot? And you could buy a BMW and drive a Mercedes. I'm like, that's just not me. I would say to people like, I'm blue collar, white collar, man, right? I'd like to be in the trenches, and I think the same with you, right? Is that I'm blue collar, white collar. It's like it doesn't. I'd like to be grounded. I'd like to. Number of times when I'm doing renovations, my contractors always like, KY, man, you're the only general contractor that has hired me that is in here grunting it out, doing menial labor stuff. Like when I built my pool, I put these young kids to shame. I was paying them, and they were like running for cover because it was too hot. I'm like, okay, you got an older guy here lugging concrete in a wheelbarrow, because I think I had like 6 concrete trucks or something. I think like 50 metric. I don't know. It was something insane, the amount of concrete I put into that pool. But it had to be hand bombed down because the concrete truck couldn't get down to our thing. But I was just shaking my head because I was out working the workers I was hiring. I'm like, all right, I'm an older guy. I'm the owner. And shame on you. You're hiding in the shade because it's too hot. So that was the beginning of my awareness that I think as a society, we've gotten a little bit soft. I think, we don't value the grunt work of like in enduring and going like life is supposed to be hard. That's the norm. Okay. So if we can accept that life is supposed to be hard, then when you get easy years or easy days, then number one, you'll appreciate it a lot more. But number two is that you won't begrudge your, say, bad luck or bad karma or whatever life throws at you if you have bad luck, because that's the norm, right? Yeah. We certainly are, highly lucky. We can flip a switch and have freaking, sorry about my language, but we can have electricity. We can have water. We can open up a fridge and we have food. We'll turn a key and we can go from one place to another. When in human history has that been possible? If we have an illness, we can go and get medication, communication. We can see each other right now.
Yeah.
To be able to do this right now is mind blowing. It's mind blowing. Like we can't forget that. 20 years ago, if you told me, hey, KY, we're going to be able to just sit here and talk a world away, I'll be like, bullshit. Or you say to me, you can hold something in your hand that has all of the knowledge of the world in your hand, and you can find it out just in this little box in your hand. I'll be like, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Now, look at it now. Right. And that's why, yeah, exactly. Right. And that's why I would say to my kids, like, you don't need to go to university. I actually go like, you can learn a ton of stuff on YouTube. If you are open-minded and you spend the time, you actually, again, a lot of people don't listen to all podcasts, right? They listen to the money lines, and then they get bored, and then they don't finish the whole podcast and actually make notes on them, right? And certainly, I've spent literally thousands of hours through this space because of my wife's breast cancer.
Yeah.
And certainly that was the driving force, is that, it kind of sharpens your focus when someone else's could be dying of a disease that you love. I actually took notes like I was in university. But the coolest thing is, like, I'm going like, this is free. Well, other than an internet connection, right? Paid like $50 a month for an internet connection in my computer,
which we're paying for anyways.
But that's what I'm saying. And it blew my mind that this is free. Like, I can click on any of these. And a lot of these were lectures from university profs or world renowned lecturers. And I could click on it and suck all the knowledge that they had and not pay tuition. Just sit there and just suck it all in and go, okay, now what next? What's the next one where I can kind of put the pieces of the puzzle together? And it took a while, but then once the paradigm was busted of the old way of living, it's certainly what's way easier to go, okay, now everything slots in very easily. If we kind of talk about, inflammation or metabolic disease, it's all related to inflammation,
Yeah.
And
well, you know what, KY,
environmental factor.
This is a good segue.
100%.
We go right into the mini episode, because we might end up breaking this up into two. Where can people find out about Altitude Tech? I want to make sure, where do they go to find out about Altitude Tech? Where do they go to message you if they want to talk to you more about it before we move on to our mini episode about inflation?
Yeah, the easiest way right now is to email me, because we are my website has been down for the last couple of years and we are still busier than hell. It's kind of a good thing, but I have to get the website up. You can find us on the Wayback Machine, kind of a time machine, and just type in www.altitudetech.ca and it'll pull up the old stored, archived website pages there. But we're in the process of getting a web designer and redoing that. But best way, they can email me, KL, my initials, K as in kilo, L as in Lima, at Altitude Tech, all one word, and it's TECH, altitudetech.ca, KL at altitudetech.ca. Reach out to me. I'll get back to you. But love to, if you have questions about any of these things that we've talked about, maybe you can correct me. Love that. It's like, hey, maybe what you're talking about, maybe is not right because I heard of such and such and such. Awesome. Love to hear about it. And we can debate that and talk about it. Because I'm always, like I said, open to being wrong. I'm actually looking to be wrong so that I can ensure that my paradigm is still secure, right? Not again, to be dogmatic in ideological in terms of having my paradigm being secure. It's just going like, okay, I can still believe in this paradigm because there's been no other evidence to supplant or to tear down how I view the world in this way. Does that make sense? Is that when I ask people?
Perfect sense. And I'll link up your contact in the show notes for the podcast so people can find it. But you did a good job sharing it. Thank you for not only joining us today on the Core Health Collective show, but also thank you for being an entrepreneur looking to make the world a better place.